The fact that tech entrepreneur Elon Musk is dipping his toes into overseas politics is clearly infuriating European leaders.
Members of the European Parliament are calling on the EU to investigate whether Musk's company, X, is violating the EU's Digital Service Act.
European Member of Parliament Damien Bossleger told The Guardian, "I don't understand why people believe that free speech is not affected by the concentration of opinion-making power in the hands of the few. For me, that has rather illiberal autocratic tendencies rather than liberal tendencies when one voice is so much more powerful than all the others." French politician Jean-Noël Barrot hinted on a French news show that if X gets out of hand, a ban might be considered.
Talking to X, is it Barrett or Barrault? Surely it should be Barrault.
Jean-Bleu
Barrault.
Oh, I know what I shall do with your free speech.
I won't read his tweet in a French accent. You can imagine it for yourselves via the lens of my Irish accent. Anyway, what Monsieur Barrault wrote was, in 2022 as Europeans, we have equipped ourselves with clear rules to protect public debate online. If the European Commission does not exercise its powers firmly, it will have to leave it to the member states that wish to take national measures. Musk, meanwhile, is set to have a space discussion with Alice Weidel, Germany's AfD party leader.
She took to X herself and wrote, "Big Brother is watching you. 150 EU officials supposed to monitor my conversation with Elon Musk." I'll leave it at that. An EU that uses, this is still her quote, its bureaucracy to exercise censorship on social media is instilling the spirit of unfreedom. The DSA threatens democracy. Top digital officials at the EU have vowed to ramp up the investigation into X that was started in 2023, according to a letter obtained by Bloomberg. I've been listening to all of the Hercule Poirot, Agatha Christie stories on audiobooks, so my French, Belgian, European accents are really top-notch.
Poirot is great. He should have a bigger audience in the United States.
Fantastic. I feel I finished them all. I feel like I've lost my best friend. He's truly remarkable.
It is. So after this moment of comedy, I suspect we're going to have a European-American liberal versus libertarian.
Yes, because you know where I would like to tell these EU bureaucrats to stick their regulations
as they protect public spaces for the fairness of greater
fairness. I mean, their view of fairness is that they. I mean, look, but this is transparent. What's going on here? They don't like what Elon Musk has to say. They think it is harmful to the political project and to the political parties they support, and they would like it to be restricted on that way. Now, keep in mind, they began investigating X long before his recent interest in the German elections and British political stuff. They were already looking at X for a variety of reasons. Look, I think the EU is very heavy-handed when it comes to speech online. I think they are paranoid about some of the subjects that our media here in America is also worried about, but we have strong First Amendment protections, a very different norm. I think they would certainly like to put rules in place that would make it harder for you to express dissident or provocative or conservative viewpoints on social media. They think that they embrace a very large definition of what constitutes hate speech, including they will fine and eventually jail people for expressing far-right Nazi sort of views. I deplore those views. I don't think you should go to jail for them, and so on and so forth. It is a American-European split on how to handle norms of speech, and I think their way is bad and wrong. But they can go ahead with it. I guess it's their Europe.
Well, I think in relation to Nazi speech, I mean, you have to understand the enormous catastrophe that took place on that continent and the understandable reasons for allowing any of that opinion to gain steam and gain traction. But to the broader point here, and it's the MEP, Mr. Buschlager from Germany, who you quoted in The Guardian, where he says, "I don't understand why people believe that free speech is not affected by the concentration of opinion-making power in the hands of the few." That seems to me to be a very valid point. One of the ongoing debates or arguments that you and I have had, I think, is my belief that if you allow billionaires of whatever political disposition untrammeled power, whether it is in relation to X, whether it is in relation to election spending, whether it's in relation to funding political causes with hundreds of millions of dollars, the defense that that is their free speech runs into the problem that it in effect drowns out the speech of people who do not have those means.
I mean, it is just a very philosophical disagreement, but I would say the drowning out occurs when you empower a government panel to start setting limits on what is acceptable and what is not. Elon is in increasingly unfriendly position with respect to these people because of the things he's saying, and so they would like to rein it in or cut it off. That is the greatest power of all, to use the power of the state and the power of government to sharply limit what someone is going to say. This is something X has encountered very directly in Brazil, where even I think skeptical of him liberal type people were a bit aghast at what this one judge in Brazil ordered, the mass suspending of accounts and so on and so forth. Again, this is the government getting between what a person in a private capacity wants to say on the internet platform publication he owns, and people who want to consume that. I mean, if he had a very large and influential newspaper and the government started saying, we think its distribution is too vast and it's concerning to us because it's so influential and so well read, and we want to start cutting back its circulation, I think liberals, progressives would be aghast at that. The fact that it's the internet does not, to my mind, make it fundamentally different.
I think, though, that I am not an expert on European Commission law, but I believe that there are regulations in place there, aside from the philosophical disagreement that you and I have. I am under the impression that there are laws there that do curb social media much more.
Oh, certainly. I was arguing from a philosophical standpoint. There is no doubt that Europe has a different set of, yes, you can much more strictly regulate speech in all its forms on social media. People in the UK get ticketed and fined for posting hateful rap lyrics on Facebook. This has happened before. I've written about it a number of times. That could never happen in the U.S., or if it happened, you would get it, revert. You would have the ACLU and fire come to your defense, and you would get it, litigated. But it can happen in Europe because they take a different attitude towards speech.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously there are debates about this in Britain and Europe as well. But I think that one of the reasons that that the centre of gravity on this issue is different in Britain, for example, is that the freedom of speech has been utilised on occasion to, for example, misidentify, I would argue malevolently, the perpetrators of terrible crimes as immigrants or Muslims, when in fact that's not who did it. And the capacity of words or rumours or gossip like that to spur actual violence is taken very seriously there, as I think it should be taken.
Well, yeah, and I think there are limits on speech, and you should be able to use defamation, and libel law exists even in the U.S. to help hold people accountable for deliberately spreading damaging, fact-based falsehoods about you rather than just opinion. But again, the fact remains that if you believe in free speech, you probably believe in it. For both, what are these two principled? Maybe you think that the government ought not to restrict free speech, even if restricting free speech would be better for society, because you take that's just, they don't have the right to do that. I actually take that view as well. I additionally think empowering the government to restrict free speech, except in extremely exceptional circumstances, does end up being bad for society, because while you allow people to say things that are untrue and there are harms from that, the greater harm would be having a group of people empowered to make the decisions about what is allowed to be debated and what is not. And I would say that in the calamities we've seen over the last couple of years, I think my belief that no government is qualified to make these determinations has become stronger as I saw the kinds of information they tried to suppress during the pandemic. Governments would have muted criticism of China. They tried to mute criticism of China. The WHO did early on. Of the lab, of all those things. And these things ought to be debated, and and again, this goes to really the fundamental issue that Mark Zuckerberg was talking about earlier this week when he said we went too heavy-handed on the moderation. We understand now that we shouldn't do that, and that, warts and all, the U.S. is a place where our tech companies are thriving because we have a more inclusive attitude about speech, and that's why the companies that are headquartered here. It's also about the economic power of these important companies prospering.
The Zuckerberg debate is another one that we maybe return to some other time. I just think that you and I have an honest but quite deep disagreement on the balance between the harms, as you would see it, of restrictions from the government and the harms, as I would see it, of the toxicity and potential for actual violence stemming from hate speech or misinformation.
Well, you tell us what you think, and more Rising coming up right after this.